Hey everyone, and welcome to Found Friday. Today, joining me, I have a special guest, Corey O'Brien, who is a digital strategist at at the Richards Group. Sorry, flashback.
Formerly.
And and for full disclosure, also my husband. So all fighting is real and will result in someone sleeping on the couch later. I am the COO at Ginzametrics, and I am Erin O'Brien. And I want to kick things off, first of all, by Corey explaining, obviously, what I don't understand, which is where he works. So tell us a little bit about, because this seems to really be a role differentiator between in-house and agency, and everybody has a little bit of a different definition of what a digital strategist does. So what does that mean for you at the Richards Group?
Sure. So the Richards Group is the largest independently owned agency based out of Dallas, Texas, and I work in the strategy department, of which there's a couple different versions. So there's social strategists, digital strategists. We have brand planning, which would sort of fall under the strategy department. But essentially, digital strategy is the umbrella strategy over all things. I like to think of it as anything that involves technology and marketing. That falls under the digital strategy umbrella. And then within that, there's social strategy, which is certainly one aspect of it. So we collaborate with social strategists, but digital strategy typically involves both social strategy and also things like online marketing, content creation, influencer marketing, really the full gamut of ways of interacting with customers.
So when you leave in the morning and show up at the office, what kinds of things are typically on your plate to do?
A lot of POVs, a lot of point of views, really putting together sort of research reports for clients, and then getting into a client's goals and saying, all right, if these are your goals, these are your marketing metrics you're trying to reach, let's put together a strategy or some tactics that can help you reach those goals. Everything from initially setting up the strategy and tactics through reporting, ongoing measurement, just to make sure, hey, we set up these goals 2 months back, we're in the midst of a campaign to reach those, and let's do a check-in and see how we're doing and potentially adjust our strategy based on what the results are.
So let's talk a little bit about because you mentioned setting up goals, right? And this is one of the things that we keep seeing be a real problem for marketers across the board. A recent survey by the Content Marketing Institute from Joe Pulizzi showed that what people's actual goals for content marketing were and how they were measured against the goals are actually two separate things. So they would say that the goal of the content was to create thought leadership, drive brand awareness, like all these kind of existential goals, but then and at the bottom of that list, in like the lower, like the last three things, was drive website traffic is like one of the bottom goals. Number one on how they're actually measured for doing a good job at content marketing is website traffic, right? So
Right.
I find this amusing that it's not the number one goal, but it's the number one measurement. So for what you work with when you talk to clients about kind of setting up the initial goal and then creating reporting and checking in to make sure you're meeting those, how do you guys decide what the right metrics are to measure the effectiveness of content?
Well, the metrics are certainly going to be based off of the goals, and I think one of the challenges is the ease of setting up measurement. So my assumption would be a lot of the reason people default to using website traffic as a metric is that it's easy to track. You can put Google Analytics or some sort of platform like that in place, and at the end of the month, you can look at a nice little dashboard that said, hey, we drove 100,000 views this month versus 50,000 views last month. Hey, we increased 50,000 views. That's awesome. That said, if you want to get into things like brand building, a lot of that is going to be survey-based, research-based, and that gets a lot trickier to set up. You really have to understand. It's both trickier and it's costly. You have to set up surveys pre and post so that you can get overall changes in metrics. And it's not as cut and dry as, hey, we went from 50,000 to 100,000 views. You've really got to be measuring over time. You're looking at percentage changes. It gets much harder to sort of keep that data clean and understandable.
I love that you mentioned the ease of setting up certain metrics, and that's kind of the default, right? So, you know, specifically when we're talking about kind of the agency and in-house relationship, a lot of times driving more website traffic makes someone look like a hero, you know, because they can show, you know, 300% growth or whatever it is, and, you know, it's like, oh, the graph moves up and to the right, win, and then, you know, like file it away as like this worked. I think one of the things that's a particular challenge for a lot of marketers, you know, especially people in B2B and B2C places now with all these different channels, is how do you measure end-to-end the value of what you're doing if what you're trying to get to is closed, right? Or if what you're trying to get to is a sale, a change in revenue. So understanding how an increase in website traffic actually results in more revenue is really complicated. I know that you know, you've had instances in the past where, and you know, we discuss these all the time. Is, you know, a client may say, we want to drive everyone to this specific landing page, and the response to that is, but from where on this landing page, or like, how is that going to get them to do X, right? Mm-hmm. When you guys are talking to clients about like what content to create, and you know, how that goes, who all like sits in on making that decision at your particular agency?
I mean, everyone really. It's strategy, it's creative, the brand planners, the brand managers. So brand management here is sort of similar to like an account manager type role. So you know, the strategy and brand planning, their goal is to align the content with the needs of the client and the needs of the brand. Creative is there to make sure that, you know, we're sort of pushing the bounds of what that content could be. But the goal is to sort of all work together with the understanding of what the goals are and come to you know, agreement on what the best way to sort of get to those goals are going to be.
It's exciting to hear that an entire group of people will sit down and actually discuss this, because oftentimes a frustration seems to be that someone decides we need some Twitter, you know, stuff. Oh, some Facebook posts, and we're going to build this landing page, and there's going to be like a sweepstakes form, and you know, like an entry, and then so go create that, and then roll it out, right? And so people get piecemealed out these responsibilities to go create. Somebody has to create this content. You know, it's an edict that someone has decreed, and then you create this, and now that's on this side of the house, and now you go push it out, and then you measure it, right? And like, that's a really hard system to be successful in, I think, because it means that everybody doesn't understand the how and the why of what should really be created. So it's nice that it seems like things are, at least at the Richards Group, moving in a different direction. So what are some challenges you guys have in terms of kind of figuring out what content to create, especially if you're not really aligned with the customer, like if you don't actually agree with what somebody's content suggestion is?
So I would say one of the biggest challenges is the variety of content that can be created right now. You know, if you think back in the day when blogging was popular, it was like, well, we could do a blog post, we could maybe do a video series, and now you've got, within, you know, even taking video as an example, you've got 6-second Vines, you've got 15-second Instagram, you've got short-form content, you've got long-form content, there's shoppable video, there's interactive video, there's, you know, all sorts of different types of content, and, you know, those run the full spectrum of budgets, of course. And so, you know, I think one of the challenges is, okay, we have a story to tell, and we know the audience that we're trying to reach, but there's just a wealth of opportunity, and which one of those is either going to be kind of the most efficient use of dollars, because there's always a trade-off. We can sort of tell that story more with a less costly medium, but maybe we're not telling it as well. So just trying to figure out the right balance of budget to channel to type of content.
So because there are so many different types of content, and as things kind of really pop up, I think that this goes back to the challenge of appropriate measurement, right? You know, when Twitter first came out, people were like, oh, I got X number of Twitter followers, and then, you know, you started to see that there wasn't really always real value in just having more followers, or, you know, things getting a certain number of likes or views. being able to translate that action into something that a client can actually say, this really changed revenue for us, this increased sales, this had a certain impact, continues to be a challenge, because not only are those links not always point A to point B or really cut and dry, but as new channels kind of continue to emerge, like you just rattled off 10 different things, and some of those have only really been around for a short time, right? So Instagram used to be just photos, and now they've added video, right? Like, how do you measure the value of someone watching a video? When you guys are sending over reporting to people, how do you try to, or when you're first setting up goals and discussing why one piece of content or one channel may be more valuable than another, how do you explain the value of this to someone and say, here's how we're going to prove that it's worth it?
Well, a lot of times value is based on sort of proving that the channel is a good match for the target audience. So really getting a clear understanding of what your target is, where they are, the types of content they're consuming. You can make Instagram videos all day. If you're trying to reach a sort of much older demographic, it's not really going to do you as much good versus something like a Snapchat. Snapchat is great if you're going for this much younger audience, but again, if you're trying to reach an older audience, that's not the place to go. Maybe it's something LinkedIn or sort of that type of content. So I think really understanding the audience, and then there's some channels that I would say just haven't really matured to the point where they can be reliably reported on, but that doesn't necessarily mean they don't have value. So I think Instagram, again, kind of using that as our example, Instagram doesn't have clickable links. Some brands are doing a little bit of a hack where it's like, oh, click the link in my profile, and sort of works, but that's not the smoothest interaction. That said, if you're looking for branding, if you're looking to sort of tell your brand story, and you can set up some of those other types of measurements, whether it's survey data or just overall brand kind of buzz, that sort of thing, sentiment analysis, you can get to a place where you're showing value, even if you can't directly demonstrate the total number of clicks on a link or something like that.
It's funny because you and I come from very different marketing worlds right now. I, on like the more technology B2B side of things, work with a lot of people who represent both P2C customers similar to yours at the Richards Group, but also work with folks who have a longer end game, right? And even with Ginzometrics, we are an enterprise software platform, which means it's unlikely that someone will look at an Instagram picture or like read Twitter and then decide to purchase enterprise level software, right? So like there's a slow build on our side of things where a lot of it really is about establishing a relationship, establishing rapport, and I know that like for B2C folks, I feel like they've almost got a little bit of an easier time, right? Like retweet about sale at the Gap, go buy a new shirt. Read Twitter post about content marketing software, not necessarily create purchase order for $12,000 a year. So like we do have some of our own interesting challenges in terms of what happens when somebody has a larger purchase to make. I know that some of your clients there actually are at times like heavier purchases, right? Like not a $1 Diet Coke or something. Although I don't even know if you can buy Diet Coke for $1 anymore. So when you've got clients that have like bigger purchase decisions to make, what do you think that is effective in terms of content mediums right now? Like what are some of your favorites?
I still think there's a lot of value in video. Video can get tricky because there's, if you're using something like a YouTube video, there's really no limit to the size or length of it. And so there's this tendency to just create this like, well, we'll cram every single piece of information into this video, and really that's probably not the best way to go about it. Maybe you want to.
Do you think that happens with people because they, like with clients specifically, because they're like, well, I'm paying for this video, so if I'm going to pay for this, I'm going to get my money's worth. Like we're going to shove everything we can up in this video.
I think that's probably a good reason for a lot of long videos as well. If you're going to charge me X amount for a video, I'm going to get as much into that video as I possibly can. But I think that video works because you can sort of tell a story in a more engaging way. Sadly, we are much more visual creatures now, and you put a 10-page white paper in front of somebody, and that's probably going to get printed out and filed into the "I'm never going to read this" folder on your desk. Versus, if you ask somebody to sit down and watch a 5-minute video, you're probably more likely to be able to actually have that happen. But I think, part of it is the sort of, again, it's the tools catching up with the desire of marketers. We're seeing Facebook doing some testing where you can actually stage out your messaging. So you can say, all right, the first 5 times someone sees a video ad or a banner ad from me, show this ad, and then the next 5 times show this ad, and the next 5 times show this ad, and you're sort of progressing them down that messaging funnel so that you don't have to cram every part of your sales process into the messaging. You can sort of start off with very light interaction, and then as someone's seeing you more and more, you're diving deeper into your sort of benefits and the reasons that they might want to seriously consider you, which I think is a step in the right direction. I'd love to see more of that from other channels as well.
It is interesting to see Facebook pioneering something like that. It's the same thing that email marketing started to do, about a decade ago, which is like this idea of email nurturing and smart automation, which says, if somebody has opened this email but not clicked, this is the next step. If they opened and did click, this is the next thing that they'll receive. If they didn't open, here's the process, right? So these lead nurturing funnels and email automation systems that were kind of originally pioneered, being applied to other marketing channels, I think is a really good win, not just for marketers but for consumers, right? Because it means that the people that are on the receiving end of the marketing are hopefully getting an experience that's more tailored to them. I think one of the first instances of this was YouTube serving ads and asking whether or not the ad was relevant to you, right? And it didn't mean that if you said no, the ad's not relevant, that they were going to stop showing you ads, which I think people thought would happen. Right. It just meant they were going to try something else, and that's a really fun thing to see happening, where it's almost like your marketing could become a choose your own adventure of how do you want to be marketed to, because we all know that marketing's not going to stop, right? It's not going to go away. We call it different things. We've got advertorials now, and sponsored content, sponsored tweets, and all kinds of different things. So the marketing is changing form and hopefully trying to catch up to what a consumer really wants. I think it's sad that long form content and the written word is not always readily consumed by people nowadays. I think that there is some level of there's something to be said for reading through a few pages of something, whether it's an instruction manual, whether it's a case study or a getting started guide, and that's simply because sometimes conveying things via video is not always the most effective method. Depending on where you are, how many people you need to get the message across to, what type of information you have. So I'm hoping that while the pendulum has swung a little bit far away from written content, that we may get back to it at some point.
Yeah, and I think part of why we're seeing this rise in sponsored editorial and all of that is it's hard to write well. For most people, taking sort of dry marketing type things and turning them into something that you'd actually want to read over the course of a couple pages, that's a difficult concept to, for even seasoned writers to achieve with any amount of success. So I think that's why you're seeing brands sort of turning that responsibility over to people whose life is telling interesting stories in the form of, journalists and sort of online storytellers, and saying, hey, here's this message I'm trying to get across, here's a couple of the facts that I need to weave in there, but take it and run with it because I can't make this thing interesting for the life of me. So I think that might be sort of one sign that there's still value in it. It's just a challenge of how do you, if you are not the world's best writer, how do you get that story told in a way that is interesting to your audience?
One of the things that I find, I don't know if it's good or bad or just an interesting situation, is this idea that people who started making YouTube videos and just video content in general, right, are now making hundreds of thousands of dollars being hired by brands to produce these videos. And it's created a rise of like almost a new part of the marketing team, which is hiring these people whose original kind of art form was not considered to be a marketing channel, especially not in like the B2B world. But these folks are now like an integral part of a lot of brands' kind of major strategy. I know you've worked with some people like that. When you first started this kind of approach by going out and reaching out to these folks, it seemed from our conversations that there wasn't a ton of like process already paving the way because it was new at the time. How does setting up something like that with a new channel, with somebody that's, you know, maybe not used to creating videos for brands and things like that, how does that go? And how do you work with the client to kind of assure them that if they hand over $100,000 to some street artist making a video, that like things are going to be okay?
Yeah, well, there's a couple parts to that. So what's interesting is I think a lot of the reason we're seeing these YouTube people be leveraged by more and more brands is, unfortunately, there was a imbalance between the amount of money brands are willing to put towards video content and the amount of money that, you know, a lot of agencies and marketing companies wanted to actually create that. So a brand said, hey, we want to do a video and we've got, you know, $15,000. What can you do for me? And a lot of times the agency's response was nothing. You know, good luck. Go shop it somewhere else. And that's how this sort of YouTube kind of came in and filled that need, or it was like, hey, if you got $15,000, like that's a whole month of production for me. I'll make whatever video you want. And so, you know, it started out with brands just kind of reaching out to some of these folks directly. That said, I think it's changed a lot, and even just the past couple of years, we've seen the rise of multi-channel networks, which is essentially taking YouTube kind of personalities and banding them together into, you know, almost an agency of sorts. They have representation, they have legal advice, they have all the things so that they can focus on making videos, they can keep the cost of those videos down, and then let someone else sort of handle all the businessy parts of it. And so I think as a brand, it's a lot easier now because you can work with some of these multi-channel networks to sort of kind of streamline that process. And there's some added costs there. It's not quite as cheap as it used to be when you just worked directly with that street artist and said, hey, here's some money, go do what you do. But there's also, you know, some benefits. There's some guarantees about timing and process and costs, and just making sure that at the end of it, your video actually exists and is something that you can use. So I think it's changed a lot in just the last couple of years.
There were a lot of accidental millionaires in that explosion. Like I was watching like a story about a girl who was 14 and just used to do videos about like her favorite makeup and things like that, like affordable makeup and fashion. And then she ends up getting a sponsorship from like a really huge retailer, and now she's 16 or 17 and a multimillionaire, which I don't even know how you can make a 16-year-old multimillionaire, but whenever these channels arise, there's always this like group of early adopters who typically makes a lot of money off of it, and then there's like that second wave of people who kind of feed off of everybody who wants to get involved in it and doesn't necessarily know how. And we saw a lot of that when Twitter and Facebook first started to have aspects for marketers and brands, and I won't name names, but specifically I remember in the real estate industry there were people charging Facebook users $10,000 to set up a Facebook page. And I'm like, that's free. And it's pretty much all done for you. You just have to fill in some information. So the idea is like, you know, there's always these kind of people out there preying on people who want to use new channels. I think that's one of the benefits of actually using a marketing agency is you have people on staff like yourself who are paid to research this stuff and bring in the right folks, right? So you get kind of like this buffer layer. One of the downfalls of having this buffer layer means sometimes the clients don't ever really get as educated as they should on the channels that they're using and don't really understand the ins and outs of how to use them. And this goes back to like smart reporting, smart goal setting, and education. What do you guys do? Like, what are your thoughts kind of on how much a client should be educated on like the actual ins and outs of the channels that they're marketing on?
I mean, in my opinion, clients should be as educated as you can possibly get them. I think that, especially if you're recommending something that's newer, it's important to make it clear, hey, here's the value of this channel, here's why we're considering this channel, and sort of picked that out of, again, that sort of wealth of content where there was, we looked at this giant menu of things that we could create and we picked this one and here's why. And also helping them to understand kind of the nuances of that channel. So YouTube is an interesting example, and sort of like your story with the real estate, a lot of brands had trouble understanding YouTube because they said, well, YouTube is free, right? Like I can put a video up there and I can reach the YouTube audience. It's like, well, yes, and you're not necessarily buying the video, you're buying the reach that that person has created. So they've spent years understanding their audience, and some of these guys are making 2, 3, 4, 5 videos a week, which to me seems insane, but they're creating content over and over and over, and what they're doing is they're building up their reach. And so you're sort of buying not just the video, but the reach of that video, the audience that person has created. And so I think, helping brands to understand that and say, hey, the reason that this costs so much is because the value of YouTube subscriptions is so high. When somebody's subscribed to a page, they're much more likely to see that video and actually pay attention to it than if you tried to just buy your way and run a YouTube pre-roll where you've got people frantically clicking the skip this ad button to see how fast they can get to the video they're actually trying to watch. When they're watching a video on a channel they've subscribed to, they're not trying to escape it. They're actually trying to, settle back in and enjoy the video. So I think that there's, education goes a long way towards explaining why the cost of something is what it is, and what the value is, and the reason that you're actually, maybe leveraging a third party versus trying to go it yourself.
So you mentioned earlier something that I want to circle back to for a second, which is, you tell clients that you've got this like menu of different things that you can do, and you mentioned matching the channel to the audience, and the brand in there, like making sure that this channel is a viable way for this brand to connect with their audience. If you're suggesting something new, and the client isn't 100% on board with that, and it doesn't go right. Like let's say that you find out the channel isn't a good fit, but you've already spent likely thousands of dollars invested in this trial. How do those conversations go? Like, what's the next step, right? Like, I'm sure that the conversation goes terribly, but like, what's the next step to say, look, we tried out this channel and it really doesn't seem to be performing correctly. Now we want to try X, or we're really sorry, here's your money back, or like what then?
Well, I think first off, it's making sure the type of client that's doing a newer and less proven channel is a client that's willing to, invest in trial and learning for a newer and less proven channel. There's clients that, whether the size of their budget or just the audience that they're trying to reach, it's better to stick with what's safe and what's sort of proven already. But that said, there's companies that are out there, and part of what they're trying to do is show that, hey, we understand what's cool, what's new, and so there's value in going after a new cool channel, even if maybe the numbers aren't there yet, or you're going to end up investing more than your return might be on a more proven channel. I think Snapchat is a good example of that. We're seeing a lot of brands sort of experimenting with Snapchat, and Snapchat doesn't publish a ton of stats. There isn't really an established, like, what should I expect when I invest in some sort of Snapchat campaign. That said, there's a lot of brands who just being on Snapchat is part of the appeal, and showing like, hey, we're not that stodgy old brand that you thought we were. We're trying to do some cool new things. And so sometimes just being there and sort of experimenting with it is benefit enough, or you can say, hey, this didn't work, but we tried it, and now let's take some lessons from that and apply it to the next thing that we work on.
Do you think that marketers sometimes push their clients into new tools because they want to win an award for like crazy new campaign, or like they want to experiment? I mean, I know that I've been on the receiving end of that at times, and I've also worked at agencies where we really did want to try something new out, right? And like the prudent thing to do is to say, like, just because you want to try it doesn't mean that like you need to experiment on your clients and use them like guinea pigs. But at times, I mean, you really don't know if something will work until you give it a whirl. So I think that you're absolutely right in the idea that like some clients are really cool and open to experimenting with their marketing mix a little bit. And others, I mean, specifically those in highly regulated industries, right? Like I know that the healthcare industry and the finance industry are probably never going to play when it comes to Snapchat or most anything, right? Like that's a difficult place, that's a difficult industry. All right, so we're at closing time, so I want to wrap it up. But as our closing statement, what I would love to hear from you is who do you think is doing a really good job right now in terms of digital content? This is an opportunity for you to shamelessly plug your own clients, but but be honest.
Oh man, put me on the spot. I don't know. It's a campaign that's sort of playing out on digital, though I don't know that you would think of it necessarily as a digital campaign. But I think the Share a Coke campaign, that one's big budget. It's Coke. It's not something sort of underground. I'm sure a lot of people have seen it, but I think it's well built for today's audience that loves talking. It's the era of me, and I want to talk about me, and I want to post selfies, and I want to talk about how cool I am. And so, hey, look at this can that's got my name on it. That is a offline campaign that's built for digital sharing. We saw this sort of viral video break out this week with two people who are expecting a child and made that announcement through these Coke cans. It was really clever, and as far as I've seen, that was not a paid promotion, but hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people are going to see that. And so I think that's an interesting example of something that really was designed for the creation of content by the consumers, even if you didn't have to sort of force it. It had a very natural flow from cool idea to cool execution.
It is a really interesting campaign, and one that I think is one of the few examples of where you could say that something like this actually does drive sales, because when you find one of those Coke cans with your name on it, you kind of want to buy it because it's fairly rare. For the record, I have not found one with my name on it yet, so Coca-Cola, please send me a pallet of Diet Aaron Cokes. Actually, Coke Zero is really my thing, so I'll take some of those. But it is fun. Like it does seem like it seems like a really smart idea to be able to probably really show revenue numbers from something like this, and I like that it's playing out in digital. As much as I hate selfies in general, specifically anything food related and Instagrammy, this is a really smart idea by Coca-Cola. So good call on that one, and they're not a client of yours, so free plug from you to Coke. All right. Well, that's the end of the show. Corey, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
I'll see you later, and we will catch up soon.
All right, thank you.
Bye, everyone.